Really and truly, thank you for being here. This is the work I'm passionate about. And some tell me I'm a little too passionate about it, but I'm going to keep being passionate as long as I can. I really don't know how you use the words vital congregations and not give attention to the wounded that are left in the path. Several of you walked in just a minute ago and said you spent the night in Philadelphia on the way here from North Carolina, and that your flight has just arrived here, and so you're here. And I spoke with someone from South Georgia today, and I said, how are things at home? And she said, devastated, devastated. And I guarantee you, UMCOR teams will be mobilized from a 5 or 10 state area to be in service to that devastation. And we would not ever think to do it any differently. And we shouldn't. And I am just here today to say, when the church commits spiritual and emotional violence on its own, it is unheard of to me that we would not have this resource in place. With the prayer, you never have to use it. An old friend of mine in Mississippi that used to introduce me when I would be doing trainings, and Clint is like 94 years old now. Clint Gill, you know Clint? And Clint would stand up and he would say, old retired guy, he'd say, you know what, I'm an insurance rich man. I am fortunate enough to own a car and I have car insurance. I'm fortunate enough to own a home and I have home insurance. I'm fortunate enough to be able to have some health insurance. I even have some long-term care insurance. And I hope I never have to use any of it. But I would never consider doing my life without it if I can have it. And he said the same is true with the use of a trained response team. Why an annual conference would not have people trained, ready to respond if the time ever comes. A lot of annual conferences are using their response teams for things in addition to sexual misconduct. Well, y'all probably do that some, do you, in New England? There's quite a few people in this room that have been active members of response teams. I covet your input for the next hour and a half as we're together. So a lot do that. If there's a sudden death, if there's some traumatic event that happens that shakes the foundation of that faith community, the response team will go in and be a part of the healing process. So as I said in the plenary room, the ditch is not very deep of those that really want to do this work. And yet we all have to do this work. We have to do this work. So I do so much appreciate you being here. You have on your flash drive some materials, and one of the materials you have on your flash drive is, that's not it. It's the, well, it's up here somewhere. It's a guide. It's a response team guide. And it has a lot of information in it, some real practical information, to be honest. That's just the way I teach. And everything from a checklist of how to respond in a way where people feel heard, feel affirmed for coming forward, to make sure this person knows this, and this, whomever that person may be. I'll find that and show it to you in just a minute. So this is just, I went online. I always do it before I go to an annual conference. I go to their website as an annual conference, and it's a rare occasion I ever visit an annual conference website that does not have something front and center regarding their physical disaster response. And so I just clipped a few put it together in this cute little collage and just to show you what we do. Responding to Harvey from Bishop Stanovsky in Pacific Northwest. So, you know, it's we just do this for natural disasters. I want us to get to the place in the United Methodist Church where do you have a response team is not a question. You have a response team. Right now the discipline language says you are encouraged, bishops are encouraged to develop resources to help in the response to this. But there is no mandate, there is no shall, there is no whatever that language has to be to make you have to do it, I guess. And basically what's been said to me is that it always comes down to, you know, financial woes and who's this responsibility going to fall under and where's this money going to come from to budget this. My experience with response teams is most people volunteer their time to do this. You aren't called, hopefully, on a weekly basis, and you're willing and ready to give of that time when it happens. So what I want to give to you today in our time is just what I think are some minimum pieces that need to be included in a training. When you return to your annual conference, if you're going to be the one that's doing the recruiting and training and maintenance and be probably the point person for the response team in your annual conference, I would say this information, anybody that's going to be on the response team, this is some minimum information that they need to have. It needs to be grounded in what we say we believe about response teams in the United Methodist Church. And that's found in the Book of Resolutions, pages 110 through 113, and in the Book of Discipline in the complaint process paragraph 362. Where the United Methodist Church commends the use of response teams and urges judicatory leaders to train and employ them. You also have this PowerPoint on that flash drive. I see some of you taking notes. So you have this PowerPoint with my notes that are on my slides. You have those notes as well. I hope they're okay, but you know, it's a pretty overwhelming process for those of you who have been involved in the response of a sexual misconduct case. It's a very overwhelming process. It felt pretty overwhelming this morning as we watched the skit. It was just stuff was coming from every angle for me. And I'm just sitting there going, wow, they've got to respond to this, they've got to respond to this, they've got to respond to that. And I think that's one of the beauties, I know that's one of the beauties of a well-organized and trained response team, is that the fact that you exist simply helps leadership assign roles, make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and the bases are covered with all of the players that are involved in the aftermath, if that makes sense. I say to you that I think a response team, the sky is the limit of what you can be as a resource to an annual conference. You are not about investigation. You know very little about what has happened other than the fact that a person has been charged with a complaint has been filed on the chargeable offense of sexual misconduct. The bishop has said there is grounds to this complaint, and there may be that involuntary leave that has taken place, or a minister may voluntarily surrender credentials, which happens some of the time. But I was sharing with David a few minutes ago, I was sitting in a training the other day, and I heard a DS. You sit and look at the audience, and you can see somebody's wheels turning, and they're thinking. And he was just sitting there, and I knew his wheels were turning. And at some point, he raised his hand. It was about 2 hours into the training, and he said, I was a former DS, and he said we had a situation about 12 years ago. It involved a 17-year-old girl, and I knew we didn't do a good job of handling it. And I'm sitting here 2 hours into this training, and now I know we did an absolutely horrible job of responding to this. And he said, I'm just sitting here remembering my role as a DS, thinking how wonderful it would have been to have had this resource, that I could get some sleep knowing that the healing aspect of the wounds was being addressed by trained people. But he said, I felt like I had to be everything to everyone. And so it's the importance of what Kathy was saying to you in the first session. I just stand firm on the fact this has got to be a partnership. So some of the more recent trainings that I have done, and some of you are here in the room that were in those trainings, the bishop attended the entire time, the full cabinet attended the entire time. There was a lot of good conversation among the people who were recruited to be trained as response team members, among the cabinet and the bishop. It was just a good partnership was established firmly from the beginning of this time, of them thinking they wanted to have this. So I offer these little pieces to you. Maybe you'll add this to your pearl necklace that Don referenced, okay? It's no small matter to be a witness to another person's story. I think if I could say, take one piece and let it feed you as a team, as a response team, perhaps that would be it. Because you're going to go into churches, you're going to meet with congregations, and I can tell you, and those of you who have the experience in here, you feel free to go, you're wrong or you're right or whatever. I don't think I've ever walked into a congregation, into a church situation, even meeting with staff parish and staff, where there's not been some degree of division. You had people in that congregation and on that staff that were in total disbelief. This was a mentor to them as a staff person. This was the minister, the pastor that they had always dreamed of having as a parishioner, and they think this is the worst thing that the leadership in the annual conference could do, would be to have this person removed and then humiliate us by sending in a team to openly talk about this. And you have another group sitting over here that says, thank you, thank you, thank you. If we had done this 10 years ago, when this happened in the life of this church, this would be a different faith community than it is today. But we didn't deal with it. We didn't address it. We didn't talk about it. All that was said to us was our minister acknowledged there were some problems in his or her life, and they have chosen to retire early. And that's all that was ever said. And yet, the rumor mill has already started. And so as we are human beings, when we don't have the full story, we create the rest of the story in our head. And so almost always the creation of the story is more horrific, if that's an okay word for me to use, than what has happened. It has involved child pornography, it's involved all of it. They've created all of this in their mind. And so you're going to hear all of this from people when a response team goes in. You're going to hear it from staff, you're going to hear it from staff parish, you're going to hear it from parishioners. I was in a staff parish meeting once where the chair, I share this in my trainings, where the chair of the staff parish backs his seat up, he was sitting right beside me, backs his seat up, gets up, folds his stuff, and said, I'm out of here. Because I think our minister has been wronged. I think the response was too harsh. I think no one considered the fact that they're ruining this person's life. And I'm going to support this minister and this minister's spouse. And I will be the one who walks with them into their church that they're going to visit next Sunday or whenever. So I cannot continue to be the chair of staff parish. And that was a good decision, honestly. And I appreciated the transparency and the honesty in saying that. But you just are setting yourself up in response team ministry to hear people's stories. And you know, I don't know about all of your experience with response teams, but it never ceases to amaze me what is openly shared among a congregation in a small group that you're just going, oh, I don't want to hear this, you know, because it's more information about other situations. It's about what Bishop Holston was saying today. Don't vote blameless if that's not what it is. And it's people saying, oh, well, there was this time, or this did happen, or, you know, my daughter and her friends don't come to youth if that person's going to be in leadership on Sunday. They just don't come, and they just say it's an eerie, icky feeling that they have. And then somebody else say, well, you're not going to believe what was texted to me when I requested a visit to my dad, to the nursing home, and blah, blah. And you're just going, oh, wow. So when you go in as a response team and you're trained to provide that safe space as you can, safe space that says, we value what it means to get to be a witness to your story. Let me tell you, people, when it's heavy on your heart and someone comes in and says, we know it's no small matter to be a witness to another person's story. Wow, you've just opened the door for people to feel a bit more comfortable to share. People yearn to be heard. That's every one of us. We yearn to be heard. And every one of us in this room knows what it feels like to not be heard. We know what it feels like to be talking to somebody and they're texting while we're talking. Or, I may have stepped on some toes there. Or we know what it feels like to be sharing something that is hugely important to us, and the next day the person say, oh, I had no idea. You say, well, yeah. So we know what it feels like to not be heard, and that's not a good feeling. And so we yearn to be heard. So when you're doing response team ministry, you're not going in to fix it. You're not going in to rescue. You're not going in to say, I'm going to make it better. You're going in to say, I want to hear. I want to hear what you want to say. And if what you want to say is, I'm going to look you in the eye right now and tell you that annual conference will never receive another copper penny of my money to go toward apportionments if this is how they're spending it. To send this response team in here to do this. I want to hear you say that. It's okay for you to say that. Because later on you share with me that this minister was the one person who sat by your side. And you're 88 years old during the 3-year struggle that your spouse had with cancer. And so this is a huge loss for you. And I get the anger associated with that. And we must never forget the enduring power of listening well. As a response team member, as you're doing this training, as you're the one involved in helping recruit people to be a part of this training, as you are doing the work to help your bishop and your cabinet understand the importance of this resource, it's going to be important for you to begin doing this work about asking yourself some essential questions about you. Like, I will tell you, I stand here with a lot of curiosity. You have 4 tracks to choose. What is the reason you are in here? You know, what is it in you that is touched in some way when you think about this ministry as a resource in the church? So a couple of questions, statements that I encourage you to give some thought to right now. We don't have to have answers to this. I just want you to think about this. When you say this sentence to yourself, I have knowledge of the unique ways individuals experience information. We just don't all respond the same way. It can be a very similar situation, and the response is so different. A person, 2 people are given a diagnosis of cancer, and one person responds with, I'm beginning my healing today. And the other person responds with, I've started dying today. So, paying attention to the fact of where are you on that scale, on that, where are you in terms of understanding that people experience information very differently one from the other? Because if you go in as a response team person and you've already got your mind made up where they ought to be in the process of healing, or what they ought to be saying, or you're gonna get very, very frustrated very, very quickly. I'm able to limit sharing my own personal experiences. And sometimes that's the rescuer in us. We sit down, we're at a small table with a group of people, and they begin sharing some really personal stuff that they're experiencing as a result of hearing this news about this sexual misconduct situation or this untimely death or whatever. And for some of us, it's very difficult to not say, oh, well, I know. I remember when, and we start telling our own stories. We sort of, and I think we do that thinking we maybe are helping. We're sort of normalizing, if you will. I think we're normalizing what they are experiencing. But this is not a time for your stories. This is a time for their stories. This is about them sharing their stories. This is about giving staff the opportunity to talk about what it feels like to deal with this loss and their own grieving, and at the same time be available for all the parishioners who are wanting answers and wanting to ask questions and wanting to know, how do we do this? I've spent time in self-evaluation. I can identify both my strengths and those areas that I have a lot of room for improvement. And that is just simply to help yourself be aware, stay aware. What is it I would do best? Am I a person that maybe as I sit through this training, maybe I would do better one-on-one with the alleged victim or the accused or whatever? Or no, I would prefer doing it in a small group with staff or staff parish or parishioners. I deal effectively with crisis because there will be people in crisis mode. This will, in many, their language will be, this is the worst thing that could ever happen in our church. I honor and recognize we each pace ourselves differently in the process of healing. And you know that. You know that from your own personal experiences. How many of you have experienced the loss of someone very important to you, either through death or relationship breakup, or, yeah, most of you have. Yeah. And so you know that there are people within your own family that did not, their pace of dealing with it was very different than your pace. So you know that firsthand, many of you. And so that's what you're going to see when you go in here and make yourself available. Again, in the name of training for your response team, this is a piece that I just think in the name of education for our response teams. You know, I have people in my own family that, honest to goodness, have, well, they've really, for the most part, never had a clue what I do. And they really don't understand why, and they're United Methodist. I mean, my brother, texted the other night, can you tell me again? I was talking to somebody, and I don't know what you just said. And I just simply say that to say, there are a lot of people that struggle with the issue of getting their head wrapped around sexual misconduct. Especially if it doesn't involve a child. They understand child abuse. But when we talk about sexual misconduct among two people who are of similar age, perhaps, it's like, whose business is that? That's nobody's business. That is absurd that you, and I truly have people in my family that have said that to me. You do that? You are a part of a group that would go into a church and openly name this and talk about this? Yep, I am. I cannot believe it. And so I don't assume, and I don't want you to ever assume that the people who have responded to be a part of your team for training know what our position is regarding sexual misconduct. And I think these pieces out of our social principles address some issues that help people be able to understand it a little better. We're talking about misuse and abuse of power. This is no different than what we have been reading and listening to and seeing saturated in our society for the past year. Every one of those stories have a common thread of abuse of power. Every one of them. That's what we're talking about with sexual misconduct. I just encourage you to include this slide or something similar to it to help this team begin to understand what we're talking about. Yes?
And I just want to highlight the fact that sometimes, particularly with staff and pastor, the staff have not named the behavior because they don't know how to name the behavior. So one of my examples, I'm a past DS, is I had a male clergy and he would be talking to his female staff, and sometimes when they were walking through the door, he would block the door with his body, or if he was angry, he would hit the door right next to their head but never hit them. And so that had gone on for a long time, but they didn't know how to name that. They just knew something was wrong.
Right.
But they had no idea. I mean, and he did that with female staff, not with male staff, but only with his female staff members, using his gender position to overpower them without touching them.
I could stay in here all day and talk about that, but yeah.
So they don't always know how to name it. They just know something's wrong.
Exactly. And until you can name it, you can't do anything about it.
Right.
I mean, that's true in anything in life. Until you can name it, you can't do anything about it. I think somebody else had their hand up, did they?
No, I just wanted to say I so appreciate P, the social principles that simply says that it's wrong. And it moves away from any language that talks about swearing. Something he had on. Iverdune has this beautiful being that has all of these reasons why people do what they do, and the bottom line is it's wrong. It's wrong.
So I invite you and encourage you to pull that out. Have a conversation in a small group in your place of ministry about what do you think about this? As United Methodists, we say it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It is wrong. And those ... continue to say things like intoxicated and other stuff. So yeah. And it's interesting traveling across this denomination when you ask people this scenario. A person walks into your place of worship and that person is dressed in a way that reveals their physique. How will you respond? Well, I can tell you that in my experience of offering that, I would say 85% of the time, that response identifies the person as a woman. But there are those that don't, and will identify it as a man walks in with, been working out and got muscles and six-pack ab or whatever that's called, and whatever. Yeah, but it's interesting to hear the responses to that. And let me tell you, in the United Methodist Church, across the world, you hear everything from, I would say, welcome to St. John's, to, we would have someone immediately bring her a shawl. Or I would have my wife talk to her, or whatever. So, yeah, so just take this and begin this conversation. Yeah. So there's the definition of sexual misconduct. Of course, in training response teams, they need to know what we say the definition is. It's a broad range of behaviors. You can see that. A thing that I would point out to you is that it is lay or clergy. A lot of people do not realize chargeable offenses apply to laity as well as clergy. And they just need to know that. Your response team needs to have a good, solid base around what we say this is that we're naming sexual misconduct. Because let me tell you the word that is not in this definition. What is it? Affair. That word is not in this definition because we're not talking about an affair. An affair suggests consent. When there's a power differentiation, you can't consent. And so that's what distinguishes sexual misconduct. So a lot of people will go, well, it's not any big deal. I've heard leadership from the top say that. Well, the behavior reflects an affair. But what does that say to the alleged victim when you name it an affair? It's a very different message to the congregation if they hear this was an affair as opposed to if they hear this was sexual misconduct. Yes?
And for me, it's important that we identify that at any moment, one of us could be in the place of being a vulnerable adult.
Absolutely.
Right? It could be that we're going through an illness and we're vulnerable.
Right.
Or we're going through a stress in our marriage and we're vulnerable.
Right.
We're vulnerable. So I think we need to use that tool and not just say, oh, it's somebody with a special need. No, any of us
Right.
We're seeking clergy consultation. We're in a place of vulnerability.
Right.
That's the reason why we came. Because
Right.
We may not have used that word, but
Right.
we go to our clergy because we're feeling vulnerable.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I walk in my church in Chicago every now and then, and walk in with my hands like this, in that posture. You have something in here that I need. And when I walk in a door in that posture, I walk in setting myself up to be helped or to be hurt. And in the boundaries workshop just a few minutes ago, I was asking people to name times that they realized their power. And you know the first thing that was said? First thing in that group that was said, when I step into the pulpit. Oh. And you better believe it, because I'm that person sitting in the pew. And I've just walked in like this, setting myself up to be helped or hurt. And you've just stepped in the pulpit, and you have the potential to help me or hurt me. And so how quickly you can go from caregiver to oppressor is something we don't ever need to forget about. That got a little bit off the subject, but there it is. Again, I think it's important when you're doing response team training for your response team members to understand this. Because especially if this team is responding to sexual misconduct, they need to have a solid grounding in what we're talking about when we say sexual misconduct. We're not talking about an affair. We are talking about a difference in power. And we're talking about that position of power being misused or abused. And so they just simply need to understand this. That's a simple diagram. It's an old Marie Fortune diagram, but it just puts it in simple format for me. That may be saying something about my mind and how I learn and process information, but it's real simple. With power, you have more resources. And with those resources, you have the potential to help or hurt. In those vulnerable positions that you just named, it doesn't matter who it is. If you're in a vulnerable position, you have fewer resources, and you're turning for help. And as a result of doing that, you have the potential for being helped or hurt. This is an overview of the complaint process. Again, the response team has nothing to do with the investigation of a case, and I've seen response teams go bad when they think they do have something to do with the investigation. They do not. Yes?
That brings up a question. You are a response team member, you're in this listening session, people begin to reveal things. What do you do with that information?
Mm-hmm.
You hold it?
Mm-hmm.
You don't pass that along, you simply hold it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm asking.
I know. Yeah. I think that person has to be encouraged to have conversation. And more than likely, the DS is at that response. If it's the initial meeting with the congregation, there's a very good chance the DS is there. They have spoken this for a reason. And I don't know whether it's a cry for help and healing, or whether it's, I finally feel like I can say it now that this has come out, or what it is. But I don't think you can ever afford to just leave that information on the table. I'd be interested in what some of the other response team people think about that. Yeah.
We are wrestling with that very thought, because first of all, you want them to feel safe, especially in thinking about supporting either the person who has been complained against, or even someone in that family. If you say, if you're supporting them and you're a listener, then you don't really want to go and say something, but if you don't say something and they don't, then others could be hurt. So, I mean, with we have someone who is a lawyer, and she's wrestling with that with the legal people right now, as
Yeah.
what we really should be doing.
Yeah. And I think to also offer yourself as a person to go with that person, even at that exact moment. I mean, I remember leaving a church where the youth director, who was also the baseball coach in the local high school, had been arrested on child sexual abuse charges because 3 young teenage girls came forward and said, this is what's happened. Well, this was a pillar family. You know, these are lay delegates and everything in the United Methodist Church. And it was just a royal mess, to say the least, which they all are. But I will never forget that evening walking out to my car, and one of the youth volunteers, an adult, came walking with me and said, I've got to tell you something. And began to tell about being asked to clean up a computer. And the computer was saturated with child porn. And I said, you know what? I'll go with you right now, right this moment. And it was nighttime, and for us to sit down with the person you need to sit down with and have this conversation. And that's exactly what we did. And I got lucky, I guess, on that one, where it worked out that way. But it is I just don't, I think we have to be proactive in saying, you shared this information within this group, or if they shared it with you privately as he did, and now we have to deal with this. We have to address this. It's not okay to just walk away and pretend like I didn't hear that, and that you didn't just say what I heard you say. Yes, I know several of you had your hands up.
Question for you. What would you have done if this person, when you said, I'll go with you right now, if she'd said no, I won't, and you may have tried to talk with her, all those things you said, and she says no, then what?
Well, I can think of a couple of things just right off the top of my head. I would have asked if we could set up a time to talk the next day after she had had a chance, or it was actually he, after he had had a chance to sleep on it. And can we set up a time to talk the next day about how we're going to go forward with this information? Because this is information that could be helpful to this person. This is not a matter of na boo boo, I'm going to tell on you. This is a matter of I have a responsibility around accountability, and that's out of a place of love. That's not out of a place of punishment and watching your life get wrecked. That's out of a place of it is not okay.
And if that did not work, would you then go and share that information?
I would definitely let this person hear that this is information that I'm not comfortable not
So that's where you're
proceeding, and that if they're not willing to share this with the district superintendent, then, because it involved the senior minister, then I would share it with the district superintendent. And that's who we went and sat down with, because the DS was there that night. And that's who we went and sat down with, and he told the DS everything. So let me get him.
I just, when you're talking about giving the person, you're empowering the person. And empowerment leads to healing. So the more a person who feels powerless in a situation is able to take some of that power in the recovery by sharing that information with other authorities or in an appropriate way, they will feel more empowered. And it promotes their healing, their sense of being whole.
It's a very good
and
point.
that's our goal anyway.
Yeah.
So I would say that's why it's important to encourage the person. And they've already started by sharing with you. So they've already started to take on some of the power. And what you want to do is reinforce that in some way to allow them to forward.
And I like that, all of that's important, encouraging them, enabling them, and all of those things. I just wondered, bottom line, none of that's going anywhere. You're saying your bottom line, your personal bottom line is, I have a responsibility to share that in your work.
Let me get, wait a minute, let me get hers.
We talked about this at the end of the prior session, the same issue.
Uh-huh.
And one of the response teams says as a part of their conversation with the parishioners, if additional allegations come to light
Right.
during our conversation, I will be
Absolutely.
reporting that to the DS, so that then they can decide
So when you're
whether to
reaching out
share
to
it.
them.
So they know your role
Absolutely.
beforehand. rather than
Don't ask me to keep a secret.
That's right, I'm not a secret keeper.
So in essence, you're saying this is not a safe place in that it will be confidential.
Well,
And
that,
that needs to be clear from the beginning.
absolutely, absolutely. And I was just about, that was the question I was just about to ask. Of those of you who have response teams, do you say in that initial meeting, do you say what says in here, what is said in here is confidential and it doesn't go out of this room? Do you say that?
No.
Yes and no. We say in the group, feelings are, and it's, this is as a chaplain for the hospital response team, and with the caveat that there are secrets that cannot be kept.
Right. Right. So I think there's a,
knows that the
yeah.
supervisor isn't going to be hearing about what the group talks about.
Yeah.
Because it's not about the supervisor. This was
Yeah.
about the critical incident that happened with them.
Right. Okay. One more question, and then let's.
Thinking back to the essential knowledge of self, something good for us is also what are we afraid of? You know, what are we afraid people are going to say, or what are we afraid we're going to hold on to? That might be worth thinking about, because I bet there's some good reasons that we come back to this. It might be good.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. I just looked at my clock.
Yes.
And okay. So that is the complaint process. Be familiar with it. That will be shared probably in that first meeting. The congregation, the staff parish will hear that. This is what the process is. Your training, your response team, that doesn't need to be a surprise to anybody. And you're going to get asked questions about that in that small group. Well, what did they mean when they said the word abeyance? Or what does it mean 90 days? Or when does that 90 days start? So you just need, training, response teams need to know this. These are the supervisory outcomes that can possibly happen when there is a complaint filed. And again, in a model way, all of this information is shared with the congregation, with the staff, with staff parish when this meeting is pulled together. So again, you have access to all of this. Every one of you in here could come up with 8 more questions to add to this list. This is just a beginning place. You are all about healing. And so how do you assess what people need in order to heal? I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in response team ministry is we go in one time and there's never any follow-up. We go in one time and we say, okay, we did that. Check it off the list. And that is a really well, I don't know what the right word, just not okay thing to do. But that happens.
On an infection.
Do what?
It's kind of like putting a bandage on an infection.
Yeah.
So what is
And so when you when you begin,
Malpractice.
do what?
It sounds like malpractice.
Yeah, it does.
So
It does.
What is a reasonable, I mean, what would you consider to be a schedule of how many times, or, you know, how do you determine that?
I think,
When I do this training with my team, I want to be able to tell them this is what will be expected of you.
and I think these are the questions.
You would go in how many times?
Yeah, and these are some of the questions. You know, I've been in situations where I've sat down with staff, and within the first 30 minutes of listening to staff, the wounds are so deep, and the confusion, the what in the world do I do with all of this? How do I balance my position on staff and the fact that I'm a human being, and this is a huge loss for me, that I've been involved where we would go back a week later or 2 weeks later and meet with that staff again, or meet with staff parish and then go back a week later to meet with them again based on what they had been able to do. So I think you're setting yourself up to say, we're going to go in, 3 months later we're going to go back again, 6 months later we're going to go back again, 9 months later we're going to go back. But I mean, there does need to be follow-up, but I think that follow-up needs to be tailored to what the needs are of the people you are ministering to. Mm-hmm.
The bigger the mess, the longer you're in it.
Do what? I'm sorry?
The bigger the mess, the longer you're in it.
Well,
The larger the church, sometimes the longer you're in. The longest that I had a team in as DS was 3 months consecutively. It was a pretty large church, so we put in a worship pastor. We put in an executive pastor that just took care of all of the business. The worship pastor took care of the preaching, and we put in a spiritual director. And the spiritual director held listening sessions throughout the 3-month period that helped that church. Number one, most of them don't know what connection means, but when you're in a mess, you will fall in love with connection.
Yeah.
Because what I saw was that conference, the conference came around them,
That's great.
held them, and carried them for 3 months.
Yes.
Every week
Yes.
they had those 3 available to them. And
So-
at the end, when a new pastor came in, they were ready
Yeah.
to move forward. So
Great.
the bigger the mess, the longer you may have to stay.
That's right. And they're all a mess, and they're all complicated, and the longer you do the work, you just see that in every situation. What is it Marie says all the time? None of them are simple. They're never simple, and they aren't. They are never, ever simple.
One of the things that I've learned is that, too, if you go in and you're expected to respond to all of the needs in one fell swoop, you might as well not go.
Yeah.
But if you resolve one need at a time, if you work on one specific area and resolve it, and let people know that's what you're going to do. You're
Right.
going to resolve only one at a time.
Right.
Then you move to the next one, and you do the healing over a longer period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Where you go in, you take the deep breaths. You are the one being able to say, okay, this is what I'm hearing. And when you come back together in that big group, which I recommend you do, and the small groups share some of the things they've come up with, you're going to hear, if there's 12 different groups, you're going to hear 12 different things probably. So again, just use these as a beginning point in your training. These are some of the things you're going to want to pay attention to. What were we able to identify that would feel like help to this group right now? So this is just a piece that I love, and it's Parker Palmer's image of seeing a person's soul or being able to relate to a person's soul. And again, I share it because it's just a way that I learn well. So if I have this image, then it makes sense. And he likens it to wanting to experience a wild animal in its natural habitat. And if you're going to go barreling in to that natural habitat and making a lot of noise and clinging and clanging, the likelihood of being able to see that animal is slim to none. But if you will walk in gently and you'll have a seat and you'll be patient, and you'll be open to receiving what presents itself, your chances just increased that you may get to see. And I just love that because I think it speaks to the ministry of response teams. And I want to offer to you an exercise that I would encourage you to think about using when you are doing your training with your response team. I don't know, I don't have a title for it other than it's a listening exercise. I was actually at a workshop at the National Cathedral probably, oh my gosh, 10 or 12 years ago. And this was a workshop that I think it was Karen Armstrong did that I was in. And it was around stories and hearing people's stories and holding them in a sacred place. So here's the exercise. And I'll just say it so you can jot it down, but I believe it's in my notes on this PowerPoint as well. So the exercise is, among your response team recruits, you would ask them to split into groups of 3s. One person is going to be the storyteller. 2 people are going to listen. And you just simply ask that one person if they would be willing to share a story that's very important in their life. And it might be a story they heard passed down from their parents, or it might be something that they've experienced themselves, but it's something that's important to them. And probably certainly not more than 5 minutes. And so these 3 people go to an area where they can have a little privacy. And the one person shares their story and the other 2 people listen. And when they finish sharing the story, one of the listeners retells it in the first person. And the other person retells it in the third person. So you hear the story told. I'm a little girl, and I was the 5th of 7 children born in a rural, poor family. And then you hear it, once upon a time, there was a little girl, and she was the 5th of 7 to be born into a family in a rural. It is a powerful, powerful exercise on what it means to really show up and listen. And let me tell you, one of the things that you're going to hear, I think the likelihood is you're going to hear, is the storyteller is going to be so moved having been heard so well. And so that's what we're asking response teams to do. We're asking them to go in and listen. Not judge, not fix, not rescue, to simply listen. Because when we name it, and when we say, we're not afraid of this, we're going to look this in the eye. We're not going to lift that proverbial rug and sweep it under it and put it back down. We're going to talk about this. And we can talk about this as much as we need to. And we want you to help us know what you want. Because another of my experiences, and I'm sure some of you have had it too, is you will have people say, oh, when are y'all coming back? Yeah. So you can expect to hear shock. You can expect to hear denial. You can expect to hear anger. You can expect to hear intense sadness. You can expect to hear conflict. And so what did I just describe? Grief. Exactly. That's what I just described. And that's why you're there. This is a huge, huge loss at so many different levels for so many people. So your next workshop in here is going to give you the nuts and bolts of what it looks and sounds like to work with the staff parish, with the church staff, because there are unique things to staff parish, and there are unique things to church staff. For a lot of staff parish, they're going to be dealing with the fact that, there were a lot of people that expressed concern, and we didn't take it seriously. And there, for a lot of staff parish, they've become very close to the ministerial leader that may be the accused, and that is a very different position than anyone else is dealing with in the church. Church staff has got to have the time to process this. We can't just say, Dr. Time is going to heal this, and you just need to get busy and stay busy and get on with it, and we just can't. We got to keep the pace that everything's fine here. You're going to lose staff if that's what you choose to do. And then the congregational meeting, there's 1,000 different ways this can be done. Some people do it on Sunday afternoons. Some people say that's the worst time in the world to do it. Do it on a weeknight. Some people say no, the better time's on a Saturday. You've got to, that's the importance of having a response team coordinator who is hearing from the DS and hearing from the bishop. This is where this congregation is right now. This is where this congregation is. The small groups you will break into will be encouraged to express their feelings around what they have learned has happened. It will be an education time for these people, and it will be a time where you will want to encourage them to give some energy to spiritually. Where is God in all of this? Where there's encouragement to talk about that. Children and youth, we could spend a whole lot of time talking about this. Depending on what has happened here, so often I hear situations where a minister has had this complaint filed, the decision has been made following involuntary leave that credentials are going to be surrendered. The person leaves ministry, and the person and their family have children who are in the youth group and very much a part of the youth group. And now all of a sudden this entire family is plucked from this congregation. And the youth have got to be told that this has happened, and these are things that happen sometime. And we are going to talk about this as much as we need to talk about this. And we are going to have support services for you in talking about this. And this needs to be relayed by someone they trust and know. So, this doesn't need to be any surprises. And the truth of the matter is, my experience, the youth handle this a whole lot better, which they handle most things a whole lot better than the adults. They are open to hearing and being in conversation about this, where adults, as you said, Will, so often are just like, do we really have to say that? Yeah. So again, you have this PowerPoint. It is a template for you to do your training from. I cannot tell you how open I am to being a support for you. There is one of me. And there is one 1-800 number in the world, and that is my phone number. And then I am out of the office about 2 weeks out of every month doing training, but I really want to hear from you. I really want to be able to support you in this ministry. My dream is that we will be able to develop a network of response team people in the United Methodist Church, especially if we could even just do it at the beginning jurisdictionally, where if you're in the northeastern jurisdiction, you aren't there by yourself doing this. If you're in the western jurisdiction, you're not the only people out there doing this. You have colleagues who are doing this work and you can be in contact with. This is not, I say this to bishops all the time, this is not work that was ever intended to be done alone. And response team work is not work that was ever intended to be done alone. You need support. You need to have people you can talk to. Debriefing following response team meetings, oh my goodness. I would go so far as to put it probably number 1 on your list of must-dos. Don't just get in your car and drive off your separate ways. Build in time where you as response team members have the opportunity to debrief what that experience was just all about. Because that family that went off on an anger streak, because the same thing happened to their child, and they're still convinced their child was falsely accused, that was heavy stuff to hear. To have an 88-year-old look me in the eye and say, I will never pay another penny of apportionments if people like you are being sent in with that money. I mean, that's heavy stuff to hold on to, much less the stuff where people are spilling their hearts out in a cry for help. You said how long? I say give it a year. But I say that as a mental health therapist to an individual or a family following a loss. You don't need to make a lot of big decisions in this year. You need to be giving yourself permission to move at your pace through this healing process. And be careful about robbing yourself of this opportunity to do this healing in the name of it's feeling a little painful, or I don't want to go there. And again, remember one of those questions was, you know how people respond to information differently. We don't all have the same building blocks within us to respond to loss and grief. Eldon, I know you guys did, and you'll talk about it in your workshop, but I know you guys use the When Congregations Are Betrayed book. If you're not familiar, it's an old book, but it's got some good information in it. It's a good book to encourage conversation among response teams. Yeah, that's just, you'll decide that. Your leadership will have a lot of say-so in that. Again, most new response teams that I'm aware of are being used for situations in addition to sexual misconduct. So it's a valuable resource for an annual conference. It's a phenomenal resource for an annual conference. It is all about healing. And God knows we have a lot that happens within the life of our churches that are begging for healing. And so to have this resource of people who can help navigate through that process of healing is an amazing, again, it's just like having that group that's going to be getting in their trucks with their U-Haul trailers packed with flood bucket carts of cleanup supplies and driving down to South Georgia and North Florida and Southern Alabama. It's the exact same thing. We are going to be trained and prepared to come in when this trauma has happened and affected so many different people at so many different levels in the life of this faith community. So again, the manual, the response team guide on your flash drive has a whole lot of this information in it. It's very easy to read because I wrote it. You're going to read it just like you've heard me say it. And some resources at the back of it that you can use. This is just a template letter that I would love for you to have that simply is an introduction letter that you might share regarding your response team training. The language is there. It says what the purpose of it is. And it might be something that district superintendents would be willing to share with ministers within their districts to begin to get some interest generated in making this happen. So, give you some of those.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Oh wow. Okay. I went a little over. Thank you for your patience. This probably may have felt a little rushed to you. It sure did to me. But just know that we're here to support you and help put you in contact with some of these people in this room that are doing amazing work in response team ministry. So thank you. Thank you.